Hello everybody, and today I'll be going over the results of the NAIC Switch Series Gym Leader Challenge tournament. Looking at the metagame, there were 188 players total, which is the largest Gym Leader Challenge tournament to date, and the meta was pretty diverse. All types except Fairy were played. There were 38 Psychic, 37 Water, 22 Colorless, 20 Dragon, 16 Fighting, 15 Grass, 12 Darkness, 7 Metal, 7 Lightning, and 6 Fire. So the first top 8 list was Hops Colorless, pretty consistent, just based on the Fire Energy engine here to use Mela and Raihan to reaccelerate the basic energy after one of your Pokemon gets knocked out to string attackers. Used the Hops core with the Cramorant that has the Fickle Spitting for 120. If your opponent doesn't have 3 or 4 prize cards remaining, it does nothing. That gets boosted by 30 by the Hops Snorlax Extra Helpings and the Hops Choice Band, which also makes the attack cost 1 less. So it can be a free 180 damage, and that's very solid on an attacker that you don't have to commit any energy to, so you can attach it to an attacker that you need after the Cramorant goes down. The list overall is just very consistent. The Chinchino was played in this list, and in the next list I'll show it wasn't. The consistency engine for this list specifically was Bibarel, Dodrio, and Chinchino, so there's plenty of ways to draw. There was still the Squivit, which lets you shuffle your hand onto the bottom and then you draw a card. You draw up to 3 cards with Oranguru, and then you draw up to 5 cards with Bibarel. Chinchino lets you discard a card from your hand to draw 2, and then Dodrio lets you put a damage counter on it to draw a card. So consistent draw, good supporters, just generally a good deck. The second top 8 list I want to look at is also Hops Colorless. The deck was just very powerful, very consistent. The Hops core was the same. The consistency engine was slightly different. It still played Bibarel, Dodrio, and then Oranguru and Squivit, but it didn't run the Chinchino to discard a card, draw 2. So it was more limited in building up the hand after filling your hand to 5 with Bibarel, but it still just played good supporters. It does play the Lana's Fishing Rod, which lets you shuffle a Pokemon and a tool card from your discard pile back into your deck. So after your opponent takes out the Cramorant, if they can manage an attacker to take out the Cramorant, they go down to 3 prizes. You can reshuffle the Cramorant and the Choice Band back in and attack them with a secondary Cramorant, and if they can't get through that, it could just be game over and you can just sweep with the Cramorant. This one does play different types of energy and Crispin, which lets you search your deck for 2 basic energy. You put 1 into your hand and attach the other to one of your Pokemon, so it's more acceleration, and that's why there are different types of energy in the deck. And then Turbo Energize is also in this list because it does play 1 more basic energy than the last one. The third top 8 list was a PalaToad deck list running consistent, low to the ground, efficient water attackers that can be very aggressive and potentially lock your opponent out of the game if they get set up fast enough. Palafin has the Jet Punch. It does 30 to the active and 30 to the bench, but it's mostly used for the Justice Kick, which does 210 for 2 water, but nothing if it didn't move from the bench to the active spot, which is pretty easy to do with the amount of switch cards in the deck. And Cast Form, Rainy Form Cast Form does have Free Retreat, and Floatstone also provides a Pokemon with Free Retreat. So it's pretty easy to fulfill the cost of Justice Kick. Seismitoad can completely lock your opponent out of the game if it gets set up and can just sweep with the Luxurious Cape attached to it. Quaking Zone makes it so that as long as it's your active Pokemon, your opponent's active Pokemon needs 1 colorless more to attack. And if they can't get that off, it can be very difficult for them to respond at all. And then Echoed Voice for 2 water does 120, and then during your next turn, it does 100 more damage. So 220, if it stays in the active for a turn, can just be devastating because that can KO most things. And then if you attach a Luxurious Cape, it has 270 HP. So your opponent needs 1 extra energy than they plan for on all of their attackers, and it's doing potentially 220 damage every turn. And then a quick note before I go into the top 4 lists, the other top 8 list was a colorless deck, but I could not find the list. So top 4, there was a Dragapult Psychic. I thought this list was more interesting because it played more comeback cards than Psychic typically played in Reset Stamp and Counter Catcher. Reset Stamp can be heavily disruptive because it's kind of like an N or an Iono without wasting your supporter. Your opponent shuffles their hand and draws a card for each of their remaining prize cards. And then Counter Catcher, you can use it as a boss's orders if you have more prize cards remaining than your opponent. So this can be a very powerful combination of cards if you go reset stamp your opponent down to 2 or 3 if they've been running away with the game. You can Counter Catcher something up that you can either KO or they can't move, or is one of their only pieces of draw, and then you can go up with a Dragapult with a Luxurious Cape on it. And that seems like a bit much to ask for, but Psychic is probably one of the most consistent types and can put together a lot of things that other types just can't imagine. So Dragapult has the Infiltrator, where if any damage is done to it, you flip a coin if heads prevent that damage. And if you attach a Luxurious Cape, it has 250 HP. So now your opponent has a 50-50 chance of even hitting your 250 HP Dragapult that will potentially for the rest of the game be doing Phantom Force for 120 damage, and then 3 damage on your opponent's bench Pokemon in any way you like. So super powerful spread option. The rest of the list just seems fairly consistent. There's a whole bunch of Ball Surge cards played with Ball Guy. There's Cleffa to let you draw up to 7 if it's in the active spot. It's a free attack. You can draw until you have 7 cards in your hand. Other attackers, Mewtwo and Necrozma. Necrozma does more damage if it has a special energy attached. Mewtwo does more damage when your opponent has 3 or fewer prize cards remaining. So it's just really consistent. Like I said, Psychic can get away with a lot of stuff that other types can't, and I wasn't surprised to see a Dragapult top this far. Next up in top 4 was an Ursaluna Control. This list, not this list specifically, but this archetype did well at the Full Grip Games Destined Rivals 3K event, getting second place at that event. So top 4 at the biggest tournament ever. It's just a super strong control deck. It has the option of making an essentially unkillable Ursaluna with Luxurious Cape and Max Potion. You can Luxurious Cape to attach it to the Ursaluna, giving it 280 HP, and then Pete Hunt for 1 colorless lets you put 2 cards from your discard pile into your hand. If you put Max Potion back into your hand every turn, and then you play the Max Potion, it heals all damage off of the Ursaluna. So one win condition can just be your opponent can't kill your Ursaluna, and you can keep looping back Max Potion and another control card like Palpad to get more supporters back, or VS Seeker to loop a disruptive supporter like Balelba and Bryson Man, which lets you discard cards from your opponent's deck and your own. So it mills your opponent's deck and forces them to have an answer while you're discarding their potential answers. So at second place there was a Dragobox deck. This list wasn't the specific list that top aided the Full Grip Games Destined Rivals one, but it's just like the archetype is really, really good at just taking advantage of slower starts of other types, and a lot of other types want to focus on their evolution Pokemon because they're so powerful. Well, Raging Bolt can just Thunderburst Storm to do 30 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon for each energy attached to it, and if your opponent is playing 60 HP basics, you can just snipe those before they get to evolve. And the Reshiram with Turbo Blaze lets you accelerate extra energy. Regidrago, once during a turn, if it's in the active, lets you draw until you have 4 cards in your hand, and it does 160 for 3 energy. Just super solid attackers, and you can really disrupt your opponent by going like a cape, Luxurious Cape on a Raging Bolt, and then Lost City to KO something that they wanted to evolve into next turn. Now they have a 230 Raging Bolt that they have to deal with, and if they can't deal with it, you can just keep attaching energy until you don't need to anymore, because you are either doing enough damage to wipe out all their threats, or you've just KO'd all their Pokemon on the board and forced them to not play the game. So the list that won the whole tournament was a super interesting Psychic deck, built kind of around this Natu with the plus Ancient trait. So when the Natu takes a KO, you get 1 extra prize card. The problem being, Psywave is a pretty bad attack. It does 10 damage times the amount of energy on your opponent's active Pokemon. Now, it could take a KO, but it's probably not going to. With the introduction of the technical machines, however, this Natu sees a lot more playability and is actually pretty viable. Blindside lets you do 100 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon that has any damage counters on it, and then Crisis Punch does 280 to if your opponent has 1 prize card remaining. So if they have 1 prize card and you have 2, you can get 3 energy on the Natu, or 2 energy with a Dimension Valley, because that reduces all attacks used by your Psychic Pokemon by 1 colorless, so it puts Crisis Punch down to only a 2 cost. So if you can get 2 energy on it, and then use Crisis Punch for 280 damage, which is quite a lot of damage, you can potentially just take 2 prizes and win the game. The list is complemented with just, again, Psychic's pretty solid support engine. There's Gallade and Kirlia, just probably the most played Psychic line. Malamar and Xatu provide energy acceleration. Smoochum also provides energy acceleration. Lets you, with a free attack, search your deck for up to 2 Psychic energy and attach them to your Pokemon in any way, your bench Pokemon in any way you like. So bit of acceleration early game if you're having a semi-slow start, or you just go into the Smoochum to set up a guaranteed attack next turn that your opponent has to either deal with, and it doesn't make you set up your energy accelerators. The Xatu in the list is super powerful, so most of the time you're going to be evolving into it, and that's where Devolution Spray comes in. So you can play it to put the Xatu back into your hand, revealing the Natu underneath, and then you can attach Crisis Punch to the Natu and attack with it for the 2 prizes. And before doing that, you can use the Xatu's ability, Clairvoyant Sense, to attach to itself, and then draw 2 cards, and that makes it so you only need to attach for turn and have Dimension Valley in play to have a Crisis Punch immediately. And then Blindside, you do need damage counters already on your opponent's Pokemon, but Giratina, when it comes back from the discard pile with its Distortion Door ability, it puts 1 damage counter on 2 of your opponent's bench Pokemon. So it puts them within the ability to be hit by Blindside, and it also makes them at like a 10 HP deficit, so Blindside could pick up KOs that it otherwise wouldn't. The other notable inclusion I wanted to point out was the Mew that allows you to copy the attacks of your basic Pokemon in play and lets the Mew use those attacks. So this can let you go Mimikyu. If your opponent KOs something, you can promote the Mew and attach 2 energy to it to use Copycat through the through the Mew. So you can copy the Mimikyu's attack through the Mew. And that may seem pointless at first, but that lets you potentially KO whatever they took out last turn with Copycat. And then your Mew gets taken out, and then you just promote the Mimikyu and Copycat again. So it basically gives you a second copy of that attacker, so you don't need to recover it once it goes down. The same can be done with Iron Boulder. You go up and you use Adjusted Horn for 170 if you have matching hand sizes, and then your opponent KOs the Mew. You promote the Iron Boulder, attach for turn, get 2 energy on it, make sure you have matching hand sizes, and you've done Adjusted Horn 2 turns in a row without having to recover any Pokemon. I think this list was super sick, and I think it's really cool to see new lists topping the largest GLC tournament ever. So, links in the description. I will leave all the deck lists shown in the video, the official Gym Leader Challenge website, which has plenty of beginning deck lists and is a great way to get into the format, the Cardboard Warriors website, which has more community-made deck lists and is a great way to build decks for your own, and then the Cardboard Warriors article that I got all of these deck lists from. Thanks, have a good day.